Welcome back to Mr. Ace Math. This lesson's on adding and subtracting decimals. Some stuff that you should really make sure you know are the basics of decimals, what place values are, basic addition, and basic subtraction. So make sure you know those, and let's get started. So the first question is, how exactly are you supposed to add and subtract decimals? Well, you have to make sure that you line up the decimal point. For the most part, it's the same exact thing as whenever you're adding or subtracting regular numbers, but these numbers have decimal points in them, and you have to make sure you line them up. Well, why is that? You have to make sure you line up the decimal point because when you line up the decimal point, what you're actually doing is you're lining up the place values. Let's take an example. Let's say we have 8.75 plus 2.3. Here we have 8.75, and here we have 2.3. Now that place value is the ones, the 7 is in the tenths place, and the 5 is in the hundredths place. For 2.3, 2 is the ones place, and 3 is the tenths place. Now, if we try to just put them together in order to add them, we can't do it. There's no possible way. And the reason why is because the place values aren't lined up. Here we have our tenths place, and the tenths place is under the hundredths place of this number, so you can tell that you can't add the two place values. So in order to do it, you have to do what we said before and line up the decimal point. Because when you line up the decimal point, you're really actually lining up the place values. Here we have our ones place, here we have our tenths place, and here we have our hundredths place. So now that we have everything grouped up, we can actually add. Okay, so now that we have the decimal places lined up, we have to make sure that we have the decimal point in our answer. So the first thing we need to do is bring down a decimal point to put it in our answer. After that, we just start adding, starting from the right. Now, we have the 5 here, but we have nothing underneath. In order to make sure that we can do everything properly, we really should put something there, and what we put there is a 0. The technical term for that is called annexing a 0. Whenever you put a 0 in to hold a place value, it's called annexing a 0. So now we can start to add. 5 plus 0 is 5, 7 plus 3 is 10, bring down the 0, carry the 1, 1 plus 8 is 9, and 9 plus 2 is 11. Our final answer is 11.05. Okay, so here's another example of adding decimals. We have to make sure that we have all of our rules down packed. Step 1, line up the decimal point. It's the most important of the rules. Step 2, bring down the decimal point. You have to make sure that when you're adding decimals, you bring down the decimal point in your answer. And step 3 is to annex any zeros. And it's important that you know that this step 3, is only if necessary. So here's another example. 3.92 plus 4.7. Here's 3.92, here's 4.7, and we already made sure that step 1 is accomplished because we've lined up our decimal point. Step 2, bring down the decimal point in our answer. Step 3, annex any zeros. And the only 0 that we could annex was the one that was underneath the 2 because that was a blank spot there. And then start adding just like you normally would. 2 plus 0 is 2. 9 plus 7 is 16. Bring down the 6, carry the 1. 1 plus 3 is 4. 4 plus 4 is 8. And our final answer is 8.62. In this example, we have 39.7 plus 14.051. Here's 39.7, here's 14.051. Step 1, we line with the decimal point. Step 2, we bring down the decimal point in our answer. And step 3, we annex zeros. Now here we have 2 spaces to put the zeros. We have above this 5 here and above this 1 here. So let's place those zeros. 0 here and 0 here. And then we can add just like normal. 0 plus 1 is 1. 0 plus 5 is 5. 7 plus 0 is 7. 9 plus 4 is 13. Bring down the 3, carry the 1. 1 plus 3 is 4. 4 plus 1 is 5. Our final answer is 53.751. In this example, it's a little bit different because one of our numbers doesn't have a decimal point in it. So it's very important to pay attention. We've got 13 plus 7.8. Now when you're adding a number that doesn't have a decimal point in it as shown, it's really important to remember that every single whole number has a decimal point right at the end of it. So we'll place it there. 13, decimal point. If our number was 21, we would have 21, decimal point. If it were 5, 5, decimal point. But no matter what, you have to make sure if you don't see a decimal point, you place it at the very end of the number behind the ones place. So now that we've got our decimals lined up, we're going to bring down a decimal. That was step 2. And step 3, we annex our zeros. And here, we can annex a 0 right above the 8. And now we add just like we normally would. 0 plus 8 is 8. 7 plus 3 is 10. Bring down the 0, carry the 1. And 1 plus 1 is 2. Our final answer is 20.8. Here we have another example. 0.683 plus 9. Now remember what I said before. When we have a whole number that's not displaying the decimal, it's incredibly important to remember, the decimal always goes right after that number. So here we have 9 and our decimal point. So now that we have our decimal point lined up, we can bring down the decimal point in our answer, which is step 2. Bring down a decimal, place it there. And step 3 is we annex our zeros. Now here we have to place 3 zeros. 1 under the 6, 1 under the 8, and 1 under the 3. And then we add, starting from the right. 3 plus 0 is 3, 8 plus 0 is 8, 6 plus 0 is 6, and 0 plus 9 is 9. So our final answer is 9.683. Now, here we have subtraction of decimals. Subtraction of decimals works the same exact way. The only difference is that instead of adding the numbers, you're going to subtract them. We follow the same procedure and the same process. So step 1, we're going to line up our decimal points. Let's write those numbers. 3.101 minus 2.11. That's for step 1. We line up our decimal. Step 2, we bring down the decimal point in our answer. So we're going to bring down the decimals that are lined up, place that in our answer. And step 3, annex any zeros we need to. And here we only have to annex 1 0. The 0 beneath this 1 here. So let's annex that and then subtract. Now, remember, it's subtraction. So we may have to borrow. That's why I said before. You have to make sure that you're very comfortable with subtraction of numbers, because if we have to borrow, that's going to be a major standing point. It's going to be very difficult to complete this if you don't know how to subtract. So let's get started. We have 1 minus 0 is going to be 1. Now here we have 0 minus 1, which we cannot do. So we have to borrow from this 1, make it a 0, make that 0 a 10. So now we have 10 minus 1, which is 9. And now we can't subtract 0 minus 1 here, so what we have to do is borrow again. This 3 is going to become 2. That becomes 10. 10 minus 1 is 9. And now we have 2 minus 2, which is 0. Our final answer is 0.991. In this example, we have 57.3 minus 41.35. Same exact process as the last example. The first thing we have to do is make sure that we line up the decimal point. So here we have 57.3, and here we have 41.35. Second step, bring down the decimal point in our answer. So let's bring that down. And the third step is to annex any zeros. Now, here above this 5, we have a blank spot, so we're going to have to annex a 0 there. And then we just subtract like we normally would. Now, we can't subtract 0 minus 5, so what we have to do is borrow from the 3, make the 3 a 2, and that 0 becomes 10. Now we have 10 minus 5. 10 minus 5 is 5. Now, we can't do 2 minus 3, so now we borrow from the 7. The 7 becomes 6, and the 2 becomes 12. 12 minus 3 is 9. Now we have 6 minus 1. 6 minus 1 is 5. And then we have 5 minus 4, which is 1. Our final answer is 15.95. In this example, we have 0.25 minus 0.025. Same process. Step 1, line up the decimal point. So here we have 0.25, and right beneath it we have 0.025. The decimal point's lined up. Now step 2, we bring down the decimal point in our answer. And step 3, we annex our 0. And here we only have 1 0 to place above that 5. So now we subtract. Now we can't do 0 minus 5, so we're going to have to borrow. From the 5, make the 5 a 4, and that 0 becomes 10. Now we have 10 minus 5, which is 5. 4 minus 2, which is 2. 2 minus 0, which is 2. And then 0 minus 0 is just 0. So our final answer is 0.225. For this example, it's very similar to some of the other addition ones we have. In this example, we have the number 16, which doesn't actually have a decimal point in it when you see it. However, it's there. Let's try and write our numbers down first. We have 16 minus 6.93, and like we said before, anytime we have a whole number, our decimal is automatically right at the back of it. So right after the ones place, let's write that in. And then step 2, we bring down the decimal point in our answer. And step 3, annex our zeros. Here we have 2 zeros, one above the 3 and one above the 9. And then we subtract. Now, we can't borrow from this 0. So we actually have to borrow from this 6 to borrow for the 0, and then borrow from that new number to make something here. So let's do that. We're going to borrow from 6, make that a 5. That's going to become 10. Now that that's 10, we can borrow from that 10, make it a 9, and make this a 10. 10 minus 3 is going to be 7. 9 minus 9 is 0. We can't do 5 minus 6, so we have to borrow from the 1, make the 1 a 0. That becomes 15. And then we have 15 minus 6, which is 9. Our final answer is 9.07. So here's your pause and practice. Just pause and practice. When you're done, unpause the video. After a 3, 2, 1 countdown, your answers will be displayed. Go. Okay, so here are our answers. Number 1 is 8.97. Number 2 is 1.1. Number 3 is 28.69. Number 4 is 1.99. Number 5 is 134.64. Number 6 is 5.15. Number 7 is 12.109. Number 8 is 0.89. Number 9 is 61.54. And number 10 is 11.83. And our reflection. The main rule for adding or subtracting decimals is to line up the decimal point. That is the most important step that we can follow. Yes, we'll annex zeros. Yes, we'll bring down the decimal in our answer. But none of that can be done without lining up the decimal point. The reason for lining up the decimal point is to, and we said this before, line up the place values correctly. We can't add or subtract numbers that are not in the correct place values. In other words, we can't add tenths place to the hundredths place, or the hundredths place to the thousandths place, and so on and so forth. When you place a 0 in for a place value that has no number, that is called, the technical term, is to annex a 0, or annexing a 0. After you line up the decimals, you must 1. Bring down the decimal point, and 2. Annex any zeros. And thanks for using Mr. Ace Math. Don't just pass math, ace it.